Are you working on your author career but struggling to get that first book published? Does the goal of being an author seem too lofty? Or thoughts of having multiple books and making a full-time living are as fantastical as living in Cinderella's castle? Welcome to Discovered Wordsmiths, a podcast where aspiring authors can be heard. Join Stephen Schneider as he finds and talks to authors you may not know, but authors that have gotten their foot on the author career path. Hear what they've done to get there and where they want to go now. Settle back. It's time for a bit of inspiration and advice. Come listen to today's Discovered Wordsmith.
Welcome to episode 8 of Discovered Wordsmith. Today I talk to Kerelyn Smith, who has written a middle grade fantasy called Mulrox and the Malcognitos. I hope you enjoy it, and if you've been listening to these interviews and enjoying them and getting some inspiration and maybe learning some things and finding that you're an author but not on a path that is different than anyone else's, that we're all the same. If you've enjoyed that and found some inspiration, please leave me a review, give me some stars or a thumbs up. It would really help a lot. And that way more authors can more easily discover this podcast and find other authors. So here's Kerelyn Smith. All right. Well, Kerelyn, thank you. Good to hear you. Um, let's just get started with tell us a little bit about you, who you are, a bit about your background.
Okay. Um, hey, everybody. I'm Kerelyn Smith. I am a writer of, like to say, like speculative fiction primarily, but also some literary fiction. And I just had my first book come out, and it's called Mulrox and the Malcognitos, and it's a fantasy adventure novel for middle grade. I live in Seattle, Washington, and during the day I work as a software engineer. Um, so yeah,
Well,
it's a little bit about me.
you're the second software engineer I've talked to, and I'm a developer. I
Oh
work for a
yeah,
company doing development, so
nice.
that
I feel
must
like
be
it is a
something about
very
that.
common, yeah. I mean, I do think that there's a lot of parallels between them, at least for some types of writers. Like, obviously, there's lots of different types and people approach it totally differently. But, like, I am the type of developer and also the type of writer that really likes to outline things and do design and, like, I really enjoy solving puzzles and putting things together. And so I think that like stories and, software have a lot of those things in common. Like I think part of what makes a good software engineer is just patience and willing to keep trying stuff and like
Yes,
digging
and
into stuff.
it's kind of weird to me though to think about because I do a lot with databases and I
Uh-huh.
write code, and that's very straightforward, problem solve it, and there's a very analytical side to it. But
Hmm.
then I'm running into all these people that their main job is very analytical, but they're very creative on the other side. And you don't think of that a lot. You think of people as one or the other, but it
Right.
seems like it wants to come out of us or something.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like people try to pigeonhole other humans too often,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, I think we all have both of those sides to us. And, like, I think it's good to encourage your fellow people and children that, like, they don't have to pick one or the other. Yeah, I don't know what like your background is, but like I was an English lit major who like, graduated and couldn't find a job and then like slowly worked my way into tech. So I didn't go directly into tech. But and like I feel like that direction is a little bit less common than just like programming into writing, but I've run into a couple other people who have kind of the same journey. And like I think it really is limiting to try to define yourself only as a creative person or only as an analytical person. Like we all have the capability for both.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with that. So let me ask you, do you play any music also?
I do.
Okay, there we go. What do you play?
My primary instrument is saxophone, but I also play guitar and bass and piano, but I'm not particularly great at any of those. But saxophone I've played for most of my life.
Well, that's great. Another creative. I see this trend. I think I'm going to have to explore this a little more. So, besides playing some saxophone and a
Mhm.
little bit of other instruments, what do you like to do outside of your writing?
Yeah. Well, read, obviously. I think that reading is super important for writing. Um, but I like to go hiking. I like to spend time outside. Um, I recently have gotten into gardening. It wasn't something I ever thought I'd be into, but we have a yard for the first time in like a decade, and it's been really nice
Nice.
to play with some dirt. Um, yeah, and then like at other times in my life, I've spent more time, like playing in bands or doing music, and it's hard. I think, as you well know, like having a full-time job, writing a book, and then trying to take on any of the marketing and stuff around writing a book, it that eats up so much of your time. And you have kids. I can't even imagine. That's a whole other layer on top of that.
Well, luckily, uh, between me and my wife, we've got 6 kids,
Wow.
and luckily, one of them just turned eight. The fifth one turned 18 and
Okay.
graduated. So we've only got one left under 18, and he's in middle school. So it can be difficult. Yes, you're very correct. Do you have any dogs, cats, anything like that?
I have a small dog who's in the office with me. Hopefully, we won't hear him. But yeah,
There you
uh,
go. So, taking care of the animals can be just
yes,
as hard sometimes.
yes, he's definitely a commitment, but I would venture to say far easier than a
Got it.
child.
Okay, so you said you had a little bit of background that kind of led you to writing. What why did you finally say I want to write, or I feel this writing thing pulling calling to me?
hmm
What got you to sit down and start the writing?
I've pretty much been writing my whole life, and like, I, just recently, my dad pulled out papers that he had saved, and there were like stories that I had written in second grade that I had completely forgotten about. But like, I basically have just like been doing this for as long as I can remember. I feel like at some point I kind of made the decision whether I was going to go like all in on music or more in on writing. That was probably around when I graduated college. And about like the year that I graduated was the first time I did NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month. I'm sure lots of people are
Mm,
familiar with that.
yeah,
And so that was the first time I actually wrote a novel and finished one, um, which was, like a really good experience because up to that point I had done a lot of short stories and I had started a million longer stories, but never actually seen it through. Um, and then after that experience, I was like, okay, like I really want to dig in on this, but I have graduated and I need to have a job. So how am I going to do this? Um, and worked out basically to like get up early every morning. So like I get up at 6 every morning and then spend the time before work writing. So it's not a ton of time every day, but it's a little bit of time every day, and it's amazing the amount of progress you can make just doing that. So I've been doing that for like over 10 years now. And the book that I put out is the third full book that I've written. The others just I couldn't figure out like I wasn't good enough yet. They were practice books. And I couldn't figure out how to edit them, and it's been a journey for sure.
that I love that. What you said about a little bit of each time and it adds up, you can get there.
Mhm.
And I mean, you're not the only one I've heard say that. I think though, sometimes people hear it from others and like, oh yeah, right, you've got 20 books out. Well,
Right.
you did the same thing. And just like you, I had a couple books, done that I looked at, had someone else look at, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like such garbage, and they're still sitting somewhere else.
Right.
So I think that's very common. I'm
Yeah.
stressing that because I think a lot of people that may listen to this that are still struggling think that, oh my gosh, I've already written 3 books and thrown them away. I must suck. It's not unusual.
No. No, I think it's incredibly common, and I think it's one of those lies that is really, really harmful to writers. Like, there's this whole like my debut novel, right? Like, it's not my debut novel. Like, it's not the first. it's- Nobody can expect to be perfect at something the first time they try it, right? And why
Right.
would novel writing be any different than that? Like, just expect that, like, you have to practice things. You have to practice writing novels, which is like sort of unfortunate because they take a long time to write, but you do get faster at it.
Right. I agreed. The first book I wrote, I just finally decided to do it one day and sat down, and in a weekend I had 15,000 words done, which was pretty
Wow.
phenomenal.
Yeah, that's
And
incredible.
yeah, but I think there's a stress factor involved too. You start, oh, it's got to be perfect. Oh, I got to get it
Hmm.
done. Because when I look back at that book now, those first 5 chapters are the best 5 chapters in the book because I didn't know
Right.
anything. I didn't have any preconceived notions. I just sat and went for it. And I
Hmm.
think that comes out in the writings. When you're uptight and stressed and worried about it, it
Yep.
comes out and it actually makes it harder.
Yeah. Yes, I totally agree. It's funny. So like the premise of my book, it's like a cutesy fantasy book about a ogre who wants to be the greatest poet in the whole world, but unfortunately, like everything that he writes is terrible, and he erases it and throws it away. But then, like the worst thing he can imagine happens is like his terrible ideas come to life as these things called Malcognitos, and they start to pester him, and they eventually convince him to go on a quest to save them. Um, which like just the reason I'm bringing this up is like I think you can see the parallels to what you
Right.
just said, right? Like it is very much like my own journey trying to deal with perfectionism, and like I was so afraid to put this book out into the world, to get the courage to say like this is enough, this is good enough, like I want this out in the world. um and like that's kind of the journey that my character is going through, and just realizing the importance of all of your bad ideas, right? Like they're not, I'm sure your book is not bad, right? It just wasn't where you wanted it to be, and all of the stuff that you wrote before is how you got to your later works that I'm sure are better.
Yes, and I totally agree, and I've discovered that myself. I try and keep that positive light on it. So
Hmm.
I'm glad you said that. That's so important to discover and think and keep in mind.
Yeah.
So you were talking about your first book, which I've read some of. Sorry, I
Mhm.
didn't get through all of it yet.
Oh, no, no.
But
Thanks for reading.
why why did you choose the setting you did? Why did you choose an ogre? And because the same story could have been done, with some kid, in South America or
Mhm.
in New York or whatever. Why the choice of the fantasy setting with the ogre?
Mhm. So one, I love fantasy books. I try to, I'm writing these books for kids, and I tried to pull in a lot of the elements that I loved when I was a kid, which were like those big epic fantasy stories. And I love the elements of magic and like strange new creatures that you can learn about, like those kind of big worlds, like the Golden Compass. Like it just expanded my mind so much. So to me, I'm naturally pulled to stuff like that. Specifically, like to have magical elements allows you to do stuff like I literally have his bad ideas come to life and plague him. I could not do that in a realistic fiction. And as you get further into the book, you'll see more things like that come up. So, like, I think fantasy allows you to kind of confront some of these ideas in more like metaphorical ways, that like hopefully allow for like more ideas and things to come through. Um, why I chose an ogre partly was just like character experiments I was trying to do. So I had read something about the importance of having dichotomies in characters in order to just kind of instantly make them interesting, right? So like a lot of, like child geniuses, right? You don't think that those two things go together. So people like just automatically are interested in that, or like little girl warriors, or it just like take two things that don't seem like they fit together and like put that into a character, and you automatically have some sort of conflict and interest, and people are kind of curious about it. So like uh that is literally the reason why I chose an ogre, because I had ogre poet, and I was like, well, that's interesting. Like, what would that be like? Which is not a particularly deep idea, but I think it helped me to spur a bunch of other ideas that rolled off of that.
I think that's great that you did that because um, I remember, and I talked to somebody else about this a while back. A lot of people think, oh, I've got to come up with something outrageous, something crazy, something new, something that blows people away. And that will work occasionally, but more
Hmm.
often than not, it seems like it doesn't. When you come up
Right.
with something that's familiar, because kids can relate to this ogre. I
Hmm.
feel like that. I feel like the ogre. He's unhappy. I like poetry. I don't like to kick a soccer ball or whatever it
Right.
happens to be. And I think that's that spark of genius that you grabbed on and ran with and noticed it was what you needed at that moment. Do you think you're going to write any more of these? Is there a series planned?
So there's not going to be a direct sequel. When you get to the end of the book, I think you'll see why. But I do think that I might write some other books in that world with some of the side characters. There's a six-fingered slug that works in the inn, the Slobber and Snore. I think it would be interesting to go into the background of that slug. So I have some ideas around that. And then one of the side characters, Yogurkin, I would love to give her her own story because I think she's a really interesting character.
I think uh, using the different characters and having a series connected, it doesn't have to be the same character. I think that's a great idea. And well, again, it's not original. I mean, look at R.L. Stein,
Hmm.
Goosebumps. That was a
Right.
whole series that didn't have the same characters at all.
Hmm.
Yours would be set in the same world. You could do tons of stories in one
Right.
world.
Yeah, and love the Woods Mercurial too, so it that would be an easy thing to reuse and have different characters wandering into it. That's
And I
another
was,
thing about. Go ahead.
no, finish what your thought.
So that's another thing about the setting is I wanted to. So in some ways, I did a very like kind of cliche thing, right? Like it's the fantasy woods. That's like the most standard way of doing things. But I did want to highlight redwood forests because that's. I grew up on the West Coast, and like all of our family vacations and stuff was basically camping and camping in the redwoods and kind of showing those really dark, overgrown forests and highlighting a lot of the plants and things that were like real and there. So, like, I have recently started doing some virtual school visits, and the activity I do with them is doing like the real life plants of my book. So, showing them all these weird plants that actually exist that are kind of the inspiration around that.
Oh, that's a great idea. Okay, so now I got two things to ask about.
Okay.
When I was reading the book, the Woods Mercurial I loved, but why did you choose the word mercurial? That's not a common word you would see thrown into a middle grade book, and it's probably one that would have some kids going, "What is that?" So why choose that? I'm curious.
Yeah, well, I think of mercurial as something, it's like always changing and growth and things like that, and unpredictable.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's a good name for the basically Mulrox enters into there and then undergoes a lot of character growth, right? All these things happen to him that force him to kind of confront his preconceived notions. So, for me as a kid reading stuff, I really loved books that didn't talk down to me, that had really rich vocabularies. And it didn't really matter to me if I didn't know all the words. I felt like I was in this like really rich atmosphere and like sometimes I'd go look them up and I'd learn them. Sometimes I'd be able to pick it up from context. Sometimes I just would be like, okay, that's a word, and just go keep reading. You know what I mean? But they filtered into my consciousness. So I tried to take that approach. I mean, I think the book is difficult. It's not a easy like it's a easy plot read, but there's lots of words in it that are challenging vocabulary. But I wanted to do that because I don't believe in like talking down to children, and I also think it's like a good way to encourage them to find a love for language as well.
I love that thought because I feel the same way. I think sometimes people have an attitude that kids aren't as smart as they are, that
Hmm.
they can't think on their own and figure things out. And I think a lot of times the just, here's a tablet, sit down and watch something for the
Right.
next couple hours. That's not pushing them. That's not sparking their brain. That's not
Hmm.
getting them creative. And like you, I think putting some words in that are outside of their normal vocabulary can get some of them curious and interested. I do the same type of thing, and in the back of my book, I put words to know, and
That's
then I
smart.
define them.
Nice.
I use my own definitions, so it's
Hmm.
not the dry dictionary definition.
I think that helps
Plus,
too, right?
I hope some kids actually read it and go, yeah, that's great. And then I encourage them to write a story or something with those words.
Hmm.
So I agree. The same feeling that kids like to read, like to be pushed, and
Hmm.
sometimes there's not enough out there for them. That when I was younger, I think I went straight from picture books to Hardy Boys.
Okay.
So I kind of skipped middle grade, but back in the 80s, it there weren't a lot of middle
No,
grade type books as
it's
much as
definitely
today.
emerging. Yeah.
Yes. Okay,
Even,
so
yeah.
go ahead.
Just even like the divisions between the children's books, like the middle grade and the YA, like I don't think that stuff existed much when I was a kid either. A lot of the things I loved around that age, I'm like, I don't know how people would categorize this now because it's like it doesn't follow the rules of those
Right.
genres, right?
Yeah, I always get people pointing out uh, A Wrinkle in Time
Mm-hmm.
and C.S. Lewis Narnia books. I'm like, okay, what else? They're like, well, there's Laura Ingalls, but I'm like, okay, so you got books that have been around for 100 years. What is coming out frequently and new every year in that at that time back in the 80s, and they get stumped. I'm like, because there really wasn't as much as there is now, and I
Right.
think that's great. I think that kids are getting things that talk to them more,
Mm-hmm.
everything from the Dork Diaries
Mm-hmm.
and up. So I think that's a great time to be a kid and a great time to be a kid writer.
Totally.
So is there some things we already talked a little bit about things you've learned with the old books, that you're writing and your growth to
Hmm.
write the book you have out now. Is there anything since it came out that you wish you would have done different, or things you've learned that you're doing that you didn't think you'd do, or where you're going to go in the future?
As far as the writing itself goes.
The writing, the book, the publishing, any of that, anything that strikes you as some things you've learned, some things you do different, some things that worked great, even.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There's definitely like a lot of stuff. I I think probably the biggest piece that I think has been useful to me and I like would have as advice to other people, which is not quite what you asked, but I'm just going to go there,
That's fine. Yeah, go
is
with where you
to
want.
yeah, is to like make connections with people, and to be really nice, and that pays off a lot. So like I had I had all sorts of plans about when I was going to launch my book and then all the marketing stuff I was going to do around that. And then, so I released my book March 28th, March 29th. Um, and like a month before that, COVID hit. And our landlord told us they were going to sell the place that we were living in. So we had to move. Uh, and that basically scrapped all of my plans for what I was planning on doing to kind of hype everything up, which was unfortunate. I don't think I could have really done anything except maybe been like another month ahead of schedule. But the thing that I've
Oh, who
seen, like,
plans for the world pandemic?
yeah, slightly unfortunate for many reasons, obviously.
Right.
But as a result of that, like I think the Kidlit community online has come together, and has been really supportive. So like I started interacting with a group called Middle Grade Book Village. I think I just like totally blundered that, but it's something like that. And they have these weekly MG book chats on Twitter. And it's a community of like librarians and teachers, and also authors. they get together and talk about books, and they usually have a different topic every week that they talk about. It's kind of like a Q&A type thing. Um, so those have been really great just to kind of introduce myself to that community and then become friends with them and support other authors. And, that's been where most of my opportunities have come from, is just from making friends and reaching out to people, and just, being a supportive human. I think, so I'm sure probably a lot of your listeners are familiar with Joanna Penn, from the Creative Penn podcast, and she
Yes,
talks a lot
probably.
about, yeah, she talks a lot about co-opetition, which is like, yeah, basically like authors are in this together. We're not direct competitors with each other. Like people who love to read are always looking for new books. You don't have to be competing with other authors. Like you can
Right.
recommend their books, you can give them opportunities. That just expands the world for all of us. So I really try to take that to heart, and try to share, you know, don't be stingy with sharing knowledge or things that you've learned or opportunities. That's sharing the little knowledge that I have has then, paid back 10 times over. And then I'm able to share that back again and like, reach hands out to people that are just starting and your fellow writers. Like, I, I've been given a lot of opportunities to do events and things that I wouldn't have been able to do if I hadn't done that.
Well, I think that's great. I didn't even know about the middle grade book village. I might have to go check that
Yeah,
out.
definitely check them out. There's a bunch of like kind of groups like that. That one is really active, and great.
So, getting a little more tech,
Mhm.
which probably isn't a push for you.
No.
What type of software do you use? What type of services?
Yeah.
Things like that when you're doing your writing or your marketing.
Yeah. For the writing, I use Scrivener, and I really love that tool. I had used, I think, Novelist a while ago, but I do like Scrivener better. Um, And then I'm sure anybody who's tried to go into the indie space knows that it's just like there's so many tools, there's so many pieces. It's incredibly overwhelming. But just to rattle off some, I do use Vellum for formatting. I use MailerLite for my email integration stuff. I use WordPress for website, and I've used just one of the free, simpler themes for that. I use Bluehost as my hosting. Use I Want My Name for my domain name registration and stuff. I use BookFunnel to distribute books out, like Arc Reader and free copies of the book. Trying to think what else. I
So,
have, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, so pretty much the standard things that you hear a lot of people using.
Yeah.
They're tried, true, and working for you. Have you noticed anything particular that works better? I am assuming, like most people, you've had ups and downs with book sales, days or weeks where it's higher than other days or weeks. Is there anything you've noticed particularly that works to boost the book?
So I have not been following it super, super closely because so I set off with very low expectations for the book. My, goal was to sell 50 copies, because I was like, I probably don't have that many friends I could convince to buy the book. So that will be like, some strangers, and that would be a good thing. Um, so I'm happy to say that I've sold more than that, which is great.
Good, good.
But I'm not exploding or anything. And like, I'm fine with that. I believe that it's going to be like a slow burn. So I'm doing the best I can to just kind of, uh, I'm more interested in having people read the book and kind of spreading the word. So I've been giving away a lot of free copies. Not really anticipating a ton of sales. Like I kind of want to get my reviews, the number of reviews up. And I haven't done a ton of I haven't a ton. I haven't done any paid advertising, um, primarily because I've read some stuff that has said like it's not really worth it until you have more books out so that you
More
can get that
reviews and
read
more books.
through.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, So I don't know. I go back and forth. I haven't entirely decided. Like I was going to be way more systematic about it, but then, as I said, all that stuff happened. So that kind of scrapped all of that. So as far as seeing bumps and stuff, I don't really know. I think, sharing in your community is helpful. I'm somebody who's like really scared to talk about it. So it was a big step for me to like admit to people that I knew that I wrote a book. So that's helpful, but should be obvious to anyone.
Well,
um,
actually, I think that's great that you're saying that because, again, I hear a lot of people listening to Mark Dawson
mhm,
or Brian Cohen or anybody,
mhm.
and they're hearing, 200 ads, and I'm spending 1,500 a month, or this person has 137 reviews and they're selling 10 books, 20 books a day. And I think sometimes, again, that gets discouraging for people, that
Yeah,
there are more people out there that are still building, still trying, still discovering. So it's not unusual, and it doesn't mean you're a failure or your book's no good. There are examples, and I should probably look this up, but there are books out there that went on the market for years before they were quote unquote discovered and became huge and popular. I
right.
mean, everyone knows the story. J.K. Rowling couldn't sell her book to publishers until the last publisher's granddaughter or something said, "Hey, I like this. You should publish it." you know.
Right.
So, I think people sometimes lose track of that, listening to all the podcasts, reading all the blogs. So,
Yeah.
I
It's
think
it
it's
can be
great to hear you're in the same
so
boat.
Yeah, it can be so overwhelming. And I think like for your mental health, it is important to set goals that are like small and attainable so that you can feel good about the massive amount of progress that you're surely making. Because there's just so much to do and it's really overwhelming. And then I think the other goals that you need to set are just like internal ones, right? Like I am proud of the book that I put out. That's what I wanted to accomplish, and I did that. So like the other stuff that happens is, icing on the cake, but that's the important thing. And I've managed to connect with one or two readers who really like the book. And again, that is the goal, right? Something small outside of yourself, you know, uh, can
And
make
I
a
think
little bit
that's
of
great.
difference.
I
Yeah,
love that, the attitude and the goals, because you can only build on that. If you set the goal to sell 1 million and you get disappointed, you don't write it. And in my viewpoint, that's a disservice to the people that did read your book or that might like your next book even better,
mm,
that it might be the book that they've been looking for years.
right.
So I think it's important to keep that for your own mental health, to keep that type of attitude sometimes,
Yeah,
especially with what's going on in the world today.
right. Yeah.
So
I mean, go ahead.
I was going to ask you what plans you have for your next book. What you're working on, what you think you might release next.
Mhm. So I have two other manuscripts that I wrote first drafts of in between. So like I was drafting on Mulrox, and then I wrote two other books. And so those have been sitting in a drawer. They're only first drafts. One of those is a kind of spooky middle grade fairy story. And the other one is the first book in a YA to adult climate science fiction, cli-fi series. So I will get back to those soon. Right now, because it took me about 3 years from when I first started working on Mulrox to when I released it. So it's been a long time since I've gone back to that kind of like pure creative, outlining new stuff state. So right now I'm trying to go back to that. I'm trying to give myself some freedom to kind of like recharge and believe that I'm a writer and not a
That's
marketer or an
important.
editor. Yeah. It can be so you play such games with yourself, you know what I mean? Like
Yes, yes.
it's so rough. I I definitely struggle with the idea that like if I'm not writing something new, I'm not a writer, which is ridiculous.
Yeah,
But
and again, I think too many people get stuck with, "Oh, I'm a failure," and the fact that you've had a couple people say, "Hey, I liked this book," that's more than some people get. You finished it. You have plans for the next one. We should sometimes look at the little things that build to the bigger things
Yeah,
and focus on those.
completely.
All right.
And like enjoy the journey along the way too, right? Like yeah, what can
Yes.
you can control? You can control the fact that you enjoy writing and like
Yes.
focus on that. Um
Eh, For me, I've discovered the first draft. For me, it's better to get it out quickly and then
yeah.
really focus on editing because I start losing the feel of the book if I don't get something down. But
Yep.
my really major writing is the revising and editing and rewriting. That's where
Yes.
I have written and went, oh, this needs to be like this and add this and take this out and move this here. And then, oh my gosh, I can't believe I thought the story was done after I wrote that first draft because it's so much better now.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I
I
that
totally agree. And
and
like
that's become fun.
yeah, exactly. And like, kind of throwing yourself into writing that first draft, like as fast as you can, is kind of fun and exhilarating. And then all the work of making that actually readable to someone else is
Right.
also fun. Um, yeah, I don't know. Have you, like, I am a huge fan of the story grid. I don't know if you've dug into that
Yes.
at all. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So, like, I had no idea how to edit anything
Right.
until I started listening to that podcast and reading that book. All I could do was like micro edit, which I would say is like, if you take a single scene or something and be able to make that work well within itself and be like nice language and pretty. But I had no idea how to like edit and compose a very strong, cohesive narrative. So that book like opened up my eyes completely. I think has given me a lot of tools.
I, I know, and one of the Story Grid editors, Jay Thorne, he lives up in
Oh,
Cleveland, like an hour
nice.
away. And him and his partner, writing partner, came out with a book called The Three Story Method, which is more for the planning beginning of the book.
Hmm.
And it has a lot of the same information, obviously, because he is a Story Grid editor, but it's almost, I don't want to say simplified because that has bad connotations to it. It's easier to wrap your brain around and
Right.
attain something in that. So for my next couple stories, I've started using that and still keeping what I know of the story grid on the back end.
Yeah, that's
So
a good idea.
there's,
I'll have to check that out.
yeah, Jay Thorne. It's called the Three Story Method, and
Okay.
Zach Bohannon. Yeah, I like it. It's it's an easy read, and it helps with the planning quite a bit. Even
Right.
that little bit to get it down sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, because like the story grid is not really intended as an outlining tool per se.
Right, right.
Um, yeah, the
Yeah,
other
and
one
it,
that I go ahead.
no, no, you tell me.
The other one that I like a lot is John Truby. I'm trying to look at the name of it. Okay, well, I'm not gonna find it right away, but like I've pulled a lot of my outlining stuff out of that, kind of setting up like theme and character growth and other things like that.
I was his
The
book. It's
Anatomy
a
of
screen.
Story?
Okay, he's a screenwriter or something, right?
He is, yeah.
Okay, so all right. So tell us, Carolyn, again, the name of your book, where to get it, where all you have it published, and then where we can find you online.
Sure. So my book is called Mulrox and the Malcognitos, which I know all those words don't make any sense, but they will if you read the book. And I'm Kerelyn Smith, which is also spelled really weird, so good luck.
It'll be in the
But
show notes and the title of the podcast.
yeah. So I'm at carolynsmith.com. That's my website. And my like I'm on most social media platforms, though I'm not very good at it. At Kerelyn Smith or Kerelyn Smith author. And then my book, you can get pretty much wherever books are sold. Because it's available through Ingram. You can get it at most indie bookstores. It's also Barnes and Noble and Amazon and Kobo. I went wide, so you can get it anywhere.
Great. All right. Well, Carolyn, it was great talking to you. I'm glad we had this chance. Let
Yeah,
me
it was
just ask real
wonderful.
quick before we close up. Ben Gartner from Eye of Raw book
Yeah.
pointed me to you. How do you know Ben?
Uh, I saw what he was doing online and was really impressed. And I reached out and I was like, hey, can I ask you some questions? And that is how I've made a lot of my writer friends. And everybody's been, I was really, really scared every time. I'm sure that they were going to be like, why are you contacting me? No one, like, you're nobody, go away. And that has never been what happened. So, again, do that. And if somebody does that to you, be nice.
Right. That's great because that's how I've met several people, including Jay.
Mhm.
And that's kind of how we met. I reached out to Ben, but he was just too busy. Passed over to you and said, "Hey, you guys might want to do this and get along." I think that's great, and that's one of the things I've said about authors is they're not like movie stars. They can be just as big, famous, and popular, but they don't have that ego
Right.
for the most part. I know
Yeah.
an author that has been writing sci-fi fantasy for like 34 years, and he shows up in the top lists all the time of fantasy
Oh, wow.
sci-fi authors. His books always shoot up and all that. So I like didn't even know that when I first met him, and he didn't like just stand there bragging about it or call attention, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas I think if it was Brad Pitt or somebody, it might be different, or
Yeah.
definitely Tom Cruise, you know. So great. Well, Carolyn, it was wonderful to talk to you. I hope we can stay in touch, and I might reach out to you, 6 months to a year from now and see how things are going. Maybe we'll do another chat and see how
Yeah, that'd
things
be
have changed
wonderful.
and updated.
Thank
Great.
you so much for
All right.
having me.
Thank you. It was fun talk. I appreciate it, and I'll talk to you later.
Thank you for listening to Discovered Wordsmiths. Come back next week and listen to another author discuss the road they've traveled, and maybe, sometime in the near future, it might be you.